everybody, it's Jameson again, and I thought I'd do another little paint and ramble video while I worked on my NIDS. And this time around I was going to talk about Doctor Who. I was thinking about that. If you're not interested in Doctor Who, then this might not be the ramble for you. Or if you just don't like ramble videos, then, or you don't like listening to an idiot spout on and on and on, you might not want to watch, because I can be quite dumb. But I guess the other day, Peter Capaldi, the current actor who plays the Doctor, announced he was going to be leaving at the end of the next season, or series, as they call it across the pond. And it got me thinking about the show and how I first became familiar with it. It's kind of funny because the first time I remember seeing the show was in the early 80s. I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area. That's where I grew up. And the local PBS station was showing Tom Baker stories. And they would show, one episode each night at like 7 o'clock, I think. And for those of you that don't know, the original, classic Doctor Who, each episode was only about, a half hour long, 25 minutes or so. And then, you had several of them that made up one story. So you had like maybe a 4-parter, or one story would be a 6-parter or whatnot. And I just dropped my brush. Great. So I remember coming across the show back in the early 80s when they were showing it on PBS, and I would see it, and I realized it was supposed to be a science fiction show because of the aliens and different things, but I was a kid and I just wasn't familiar with everything, and I was interested in science fiction of all types, but it just seemed to be, there were concepts that I just wasn't grasping. And it seemed like every time I would turn the channels and came across it, it was already, into like the second or third part of a story. And it's like, well, I don't want to watch this because I have no idea what's going on. And so, that was that. And then one time I flicked it on, and it was coming on. And I like to turn it on because I used to listen to the theme music. I liked listening to the theme music. So I was like, oh yeah, let's listen to the theme music. And then it would say, part 2 or part 3 of whatever story. It's like, okay, keep going, click. But this one time I turned it on to listen to the opening theme music, and it said, part 1. And I was like, oh, right, I caught a story here, part 1. And it was Tom Baker, one of his last ones that he did, it was State of Decay. And I watched all 4 parts of that. The next night I made sure I was there. I turned it on and I watched the second part, and then the next night, and that's the story where Romana left, and K9, the original, the first K9. No, he was actually the second K9, because the first K9 left with Leela. So he was a K9 Mark II, I think, was the one left with Romana in space. And so I watched that, and then the next story started the next night, which was The Keeper of Traken, which brought back the Master. And I saw the first part of that, and then for whatever reason I missed it the next night. It was probably like a Friday. So, I watched it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then The Keeper of Traken, the first part was on a Friday, and then the weekend, and when the Monday rolled around, I forgot to turn it on, and, I missed it. So that was my first exposure to Doctor Who. And a few years later, as the years went by, I remember reading in Starlog magazine, for anybody who remembers that publication, they would post articles, saying that they had an article saying that Tom Baker had left and that Peter Davison was going to be taking on the role as the Doctor. And they actually had an article, I remember, it was an episode guide for the third Doctor's stories. So, I was familiar with the fact that there were different actors that had played the Doctor. And I continued, as the years went by, Peter Davison left and Colin Baker came on. And then not too long after that, Sylvester McCoy was announced to be the next Doctor. So I was familiar with the idea that, there were different actors playing the role. And then along about 1988, I was at my cousin's house, and he was watching the show, because they were just starting to show Sylvester McCoy's first episodes. And he was watching the show, and I was talking with his brother, and we were making some noise, and my cousin who was trying to watch the show was like, "Will you guys shut up over there?" Because it was, brand new Doctor Who. He was trying to watch it. I'm like, "I'm trying to watch Doctor Who over here." So I was like, "Oh yeah, I remember that show." And so he was very familiar with it, and so I started asking him all the questions that newbies usually ask, like, why is it bigger on the inside than the outside, and why are there all these different actors playing the part? And he started explaining to me all the, the mechanics of the show, and I started to watch it. I was like, okay, well, this makes perfect sense now. And I got, much more interested in it. And the PBS station was still showing an episode each night, and so I started to watch it again, and I got interested in it. And it turns out that at the time where we were living, we were still in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, but we were getting a PBS station from up here in the Sacramento area. And this PBS station would show a complete Doctor Who story every Saturday night at 10 p.m. So, they would show all 4 parts or all 6 parts, no matter how many parts there were, they would show them all that Saturday night. And I remember going to my cousin's house one day, because he had a Commodore 64 computer, and I go over there to play games. And we'd watch TV, and he was telling me about Doctor Who, and I was like, okay, you know what? I'm very interested in this now. I'm going to go watch it tonight on, the PBS channel. And for whatever reason, I decided, you know what, I'm going to get out a tape here on my VCR, and I'm going to record this show, just in case I like it and want to have it on tape. And so that night I went home. It was a Saturday, and the episode they showed that night was a Third Doctor episode called The Claws of Axos. Had the Master in it. And I watched that, stayed up the whole time, watched it, and really enjoyed it. And I've always been the type that I could easily look past cheap sets and cheap alien makeup. It was always, to me, I always enjoyed the stories and the concepts. So I really enjoyed it. And so the next week I got my tape out, and I think the following episode was A Colony in Space, the next story. And I taped that. I watched that. That was a 6-parter, so that was like, it was like 2.5 hours. And I really got into taping the show, and it got to be a ritual with me that every Saturday night at 10 o'clock, I made sure I was at home to tape Doctor Who. Now, this was 1988, so I was 19. I still liked going out with my friends and running around and doing all sorts of crazy stuff, but every Saturday night, I'm like, sorry, dudes, I got to go home and watch Doctor Who. And, my mom probably liked it, the fact that I wasn't running around getting in too much trouble. I still managed to get in trouble a few times. But I would make a weekly ritual of it. I would get, some snacks and some soda. I had my own little refrigerator. In fact, it's the same refrigerator I still have. I had it in my closet in my room. I had my own TV and everything, and I would go in there and turn the lights out and sit at my desk and have my beef jerky and my Cokes, some snack crackers, and I would watch, tape Doctor Who and watch it. And, this went on for a better part of 2 years or more, because they went through all the John Pertwee Third Doctor stories, and then they moved on to Tom Baker, and then they moved on to Peter Davison, and then Colin Baker. And at the time, Sylvester McCoy's Seventh Doctor stuff was still pretty new, so they hadn't put that into rotation yet. So when they got to the end of the Sixth Doctor, which was Trial of a Time Lord, they looped back to the beginning of the Third Doctor, which was cool because then I was able to record some Third Doctor stuff that I hadn't got the first time around. And yeah, and then they would debut Sylvester McCoy's new stuff every now and then during their pledge drives. And I remember watching Remembrance of the Daleks one week, and they showed it, and I taped it. And then the following week, they were going to show another new one. And that during that 1 week period, I must have watched Remembrance of the Daleks like every day. I would go to work and come home because I had a job. It wasn't like I was a complete sponge on my parents. At that point, I had a job. But I'd go to work and I'd come home and I'd watch that tape every day, waiting for Doctor Who to come back the next week. And it was a really fun time. It sounds kind of dull and goofy to some people, but just having that little ritual of every Saturday night taping Doctor Who and watching it with snacks, because it was new to me, and it was like a new Doctor Who movie every week. And so those were really good times. I look back on that now with a sense of nostalgia and fondness, and got some hair here on my brush that just screwed this up. So even to this day, when I see an episode from classic Doctor Who, like anything from the Third Doctor or Fourth Doctor on, it reminds me of those days of being a young kid there, taping the show and watching it. And eventually they got around to showing First and Second Doctor stuff that still existed, that hadn't been destroyed when the BBC went crazy there in the 70s. And I became quite the Doctor Who fan, to the point where I could name off every episode and what order they came in, and what doctor did this, and when this happened, and what that, which is usually what I end up doing whenever I really get into something. My mind just absorbs all the little minutiae and details, trivial details of something. Which is probably why once I get into playing Warhammer, I'll probably get every freaking codex memorized at some point. Because that's the way my mind works. So, and then what happened there at the end of the 80s, the 89, the show, after Sylvester McCoy did 3 years, they put the show on hiatus, and it didn't come back. Which was really kind of a bummer, because I had just gotten into the show in 88, and then just a year later it went on hiatus. And, because those first stories that I watched were Third Doctor stories, I've always liked the Third Doctor. And because the brand new ones at the time were Seventh Doctor stories, I've always liked the Seventh Doctor. So they've always been my favorite Doctors. I like Tom Baker. Tom Baker is, a lot of people's favorite Doctor from Classic Who, but, I like him a lot too. I like them all, but, I always like the Third and Seventh Doctors. I even went to a couple Doctor Who conventions. Got to meet Colin Baker, who played the Sixth Doctor. He usually gets a lot of crap for his Sixth Doctor. A lot of people didn't like the Sixth Doctor. And I got to admit, his costume was kind of ugly. But having met him, and I had lunch with him, it was kind of fun. And, got to talk to him and hear his story and how he had planned, his plan for the Doctor and how he wanted it to go. I really started to like his Doctor a lot more. So it was kind of a shame that he didn't get to see his plans come to fruition. So the show went away, and then, in 96 there was that TV movie with Paul McGann as the Eighth Doctor. They tried to get a kind of reboot the series there, but that didn't go anywhere, because when it aired in America, it was opposite of some football game or something. And then so the ratings weren't all that great. And so that didn't go anywhere, which is probably just as well, because there were some things about that movie I didn't like. The fact that they made the Doctor half human, I didn't like that idea. And I didn't like the way they redesigned the interior of the TARDIS to make it look like a dingy old cathedral. So then, fast forward another decade, 9 years in 2005, and the show came back with Christopher Eccleston as the Ninth Doctor. And when I heard about that, I was, optimistic, carefully optimistic. And the show came back, and I started to watch it again, and it's been a pretty good run. He only did 1 year as the Doctor, and then David Tennant came in, and I really like David Tennant, and I like Matt Smith, and I like Capaldi, and for the most part, I've really thought that they've really done a good job with bringing the show back. There's been some stories and some things that I haven't cared for, but that's par for the course. You don't always like every single thing. And I was glad when they went with Capaldi, because I kind of wanted to see an older Doctor again after all these young guys. But, the young doctors bring in a younger demographic, with Tennant and Matt Smith. It brought in a lot more females watching the show, I think. They really, expanded its viewer base in America. And so I think they're going to go with a younger Doctor again. And then there's talk of, having a female Doctor, because they've established that Time Lords can, when they regenerate, they can change genders. So there's that idea that they'll bring in a female Doctor, which I'm actually not that keen on, but, to me the Doctor's always been male and should always be male, but we live in an age where everybody's got to be, have an equal say on things. Some things I think should remain male and some should remain female, but that's just me. It's not a popular opinion, but oh well. So the new season of Doctor Who starts in April, which will be Capaldi's last run, and then he'll have the Christmas special at the end of the year, and that'll be it for him, and then we'll be on to the next one. So that's just my little Doctor Who ramble. I can't believe it's been that many years now since I first started watching the show. That was back in '88, so that's been damn near 30 years. Doesn't seem like that long. And I still have all those tapes. I've got dozens of tapes where I recorded the show back in the day. I was very meticulous about recording the show and labeling the tapes, with the story names and what story numbers they were and what Doctor it was. And I numbered them and everything. And I still got them in a drawer somewhere. It's out in the garage, I think, because that's the only place left that has a VCR. But I'm not giving those tapes up anytime soon, because I've got quite a bit of the show on DVD, but I don't have all of it on DVD. And until that day, I'm keeping those tapes. Of course, I've got everything on the computer, so if I wanted to watch anything, I could watch it on the computer. But as far as TV, I only have the tapes and some DVD. So yeah, some people like the show, some people don't. It's just, it's like that. It was like Star Trek. I was always a huge Star Trek fan as well. Went to several Star Trek conventions, met a lot of Star Trek actors back in the day. Lived and breathed Star Trek, for years and years and years. I just absolutely loved it. And to this day, I still read the books. You see the books behind me on the bookshelf. There's 1, 2, 3. There's 3 solid shelves that are 1, 2, 3, 4 across that are loaded with Star Trek books, and I've read most of them. But these days, what I do is I usually buy the books and save them up, and then binge read a bunch of them at once. So it's been a couple years since I read any, and getting to the point where I might read some soon. Right now, I'm reading the Harry Dresden books. Once I get done with those, I might go back to Star Trek. Who knows? Speaking of Who, one thing I have never read is any Doctor Who books. I used to see them all the time in the store, but I never really bought any and read any of those. And to tell you the truth, I don't know if I really have much interest in it. I don't know why. I loved watching the show, but it just didn't seem to interest me enough to by and read any of the books, but that's how things go. So that's my little ramble on Doctor Who. If you've stuck around this long, then you're either sitting there painting and just needed some background noise, or you're a real glutton for punishment. But I think I'm going to wrap this up here momentarily because it's getting close to noon local time, and that means I need to go feed the dogs. They have internal clocks, so they've been walking up and down here looking at me like, hey, are you going to feed us? We're getting hungry here, man. So, got to go do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, I'm halfway through that row. I'll stop right there. So, thanks for watching. I'll probably do some more of these paint and ramble videos. I hear my cell phone ringing, so that might mean the house phone might ring here in a second. So, might do more of these in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.